Alrighty, folks, over the last year or so, you have heard about debt balances spiking. You've probably heard about credit cards going over $1 trillion. You've also heard about delinquencies, 30, 90 days, and foreclosures spiking. Folks, we are going to get into the details. Is it reality? Is it as scary as people make it look? What is going on? The one and only Lance Lambert. Lance, thanks for doing this.
Housing, housing, housing. There's always so much going on in the U.S. housing market.
Absolutely. So we're sharing what you have. What do you got?
Awesome. So I did a report. Megan Malice and I, data editor over at Resi Club, and myself did a report looking at foreclosures in comparing what's going on in the commercial market and then also what's going on in the housing market, and then just taking a zoomed out look at stress across the economy right now for household debt. And what we found is that what's happening in commercial real estate, particularly the office sector, obviously is a very different story than what's happening in residential right now. And now, before we get into the commercial data, I think it's worth noting that back in March 2024, Blackstone's president went to Bloomberg and said, hey, commercial real estate prices have pretty much just about bottomed or are bottoming. And maybe that's true for some asset classes throughout commercial and certain like groups of it because they fell so quickly after rates shot up. But then he also came out this January, just a few weeks ago, and told Bloomberg that not only had commercial real estate prices bottomed, but also office had bottomed.
Oh, wow.
Now, he said offices bottomed, particularly in stronger markets and better quality buildings. But he added that U.S. office valuations have already fallen 50 to 70% from peak.
Yeah.
Just for perspective, nationally aggregated home prices fell, according to Case-Shiller, 27% peak to trough 2006 to spring 2012. So 50, 70% off for a real estate asset class, which you did see some of that in some resi markets. I think might have actually been one of those. Fresno that you bought in. Bottom.
It was.
But for office, to go down that much, that's a lot.
Yeah, I would call 50% and 70% a crash. So if you called an office crash, you got it right.
And so office commercial real estate foreclosures are on the rise. They are about 15, 20% above pre-pandemic levels and continuing to rise. Here's the chart for it. It's nothing too crazy. I think a lot of this is happening outside of this, right? Where, you can have distress that doesn't necessarily show up as a foreclosure.
Yeah, I think what you have in here is a lot of extended pretend. I know of a lot of commercial owners who have been given a 1-year grace period by their lenders because they're out of DTI or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of there's more pain in commercial than this chart shows.
100%. Exactly. Yes. And a little interesting, California has a lot of commercial real estate distress. They're around
San Francisco, I'm guessing, has a big portion of that.
They're 12% of the nation's population, and they're 35% of all commercial foreclosures.
Wow, 3x. Wow.
Yeah, and last year I picked this up, and it was like, they were 11%, 12% of the population, and I think the number I had last year was like 25%, and it's just gotten bigger. So that's kind of interesting. So now let's change it up, and let's look at resi, residential real estate, household mortgages. And unlike the commercial sector and office, which has all this variable debt that was so impacted by rates more than doubling, 96% of all U.S. household mortgages in the U.S. are fixed debt, right? And it's like under 85% or more than 85% are like under 5%, right? Rate. And here's the foreclosure number by quarter. You can see that we've jumped off of the historic bottom that occurred during the period of forbearance and all the, I can't pronounce it, the
moratorium.
Yes. One of those words that I just can't get off of my tongue. We're still not back to pre-pandemic levels. We're still down 40%. Q4 2024 is 40% fewer commercial or fewer housing foreclosures than Q4 2019, which is kind of incredible still to be that far down.
But if you wanted to create a scary headline, you could also probably say foreclosures are up 400% from the bottom.
Exactly. So you have 41,000 here versus 8,000. So yeah, that's what, up over 300%. You can get a pretty scary headline. But then
Yep.
if you just scroll back a little bit, you can see, still
Yeah.
not too crazy. So the leading indicator for foreclosures is percent of loan balances 90 plus days delinquent.
Yes.
And if you look out there, we're still not that high for mortgages and even second mortgages, HELOCs. You can see that during the lead up to the '08 crash, that number just skyrocketed, right? It went parabolic, right?
Yep.
For
Yep.
HELOC, for mortgage, and for credit card. And auto went up a lot too, but not as much as mortgage. And then we had the bust, came back down. And this chart, you can find like 20 different stories in here. It's kind of fascinating. This student loan number is wild. So there was a lot of delinquencies in student loans before the pandemic hit, where there was a lot of people who went to college, didn't spent more years than they should have, didn't walk away with a degree, didn't get a good job, and had the student loans, and they didn't feel like paying on it either because they feel like they didn't get the return on it, right? It's not like you go buy a house or you go buy a car and then you have that house or you have that car. For a lot of people with student loans, they didn't have anything to show for it. And so there was a
Yep.
higher than expected delinquency rate on student loans. Then we just had like almost 3 years where nobody had to pay on their student loans.
Yeah.
And without interest rates even rising on them. And so the delinquency rates are very, very low. You are going to see this begin to shoot up. It'll be interesting to see what it does.
Yeah, I had heard it's coming this quarter. It might be next quarter where student loan delinquencies are finally going to be reported on credit reports. So that could shoot up pretty high.
Yes. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where this number goes. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. Now, where you can see actual distress moving into the market is credit cards and autos. Now, autos isn't necessarily that crazy. It's back to pre-pandemic levels for 90-day. I'll show you 30-day in a bit. But credit cards back above, right? They've shot up even higher. And we've had this, and I don't want to get political with it, but I think there's even a lot of people who are doctors or lawyers that are very highly paid that would say it's a little odd they didn't have to pay on their student loans, while a lot of households barely making it by just got absolutely wrecked by this rate shock, and that's credit cards. So it's a lot of weird stuff kind of have happened in this data
For sure.
but mortgage, HELOC, through all of it, have stayed fairly low for the 90
Yeah,
days.
and it's probably going to stay very low for a long time. Back to your earlier point, all these loans below 5%, because what happens here in a mortgage, unlike where that spike was in 2008, your mortgage or shelter cost is fixed. That's the difference. Last time, 50% of our mortgages were adjustable, and they blew up and they crushed people. It's always the debt that blows up. The fact that we have the 30-year fixed rate debt, the fact that 40% of our shelter is owned free and clear, the fact that 85% of the other 60% are fixed below 5% minus taxes and insurance, that's not going to go higher. There are a lot of people, Lance, who have mortgages today with a 2 handle on it that could probably pay their mortgage on unemployment.
Yeah.
Right? It won't shoot up like '08, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, you bring that up. A lot of people pay more on their healthcare now than they do.
Correct.
And I'm an entrepreneur, so mine doesn't count as much because a little bit of outlier there. But I pay more on my healthcare than my mortgage.
Yep.
And that includes my property tax and everything. Which that doesn't really get showed up too much in all this, the healthcare part of it. And so if you go even further, you zoom out more, or zoom in more, actually might be the better way to put it, to 30-day. This is the leading indicator for 90-day. So 90 days is the leading indicator for the foreclosure, 30 days the leading indicator for 90. Now, this is where you have seen mortgage and HELOC shoot back to pre-pandemic levels for the 30-day. Now, we did have a very quick jump up for mortgage. And what's very interesting is see the angle of that line this past couple quarters. It's kind of flat to where it was before the pre-pandemic. But this is something I'm going to watch and to kind of see what this does the next few quarters, right? Does it keep going like right here at this line and just kind of stay steady here, or does it begin to tilt back up? And you can see the credit card and auto, which have shot up more than had been reflected to the the 90-day. But you've also started to see this angle of it, right? Where it's kind of no longer like the parabolic jump up, right? It's kind of cresting. And HELOC's kind of doing the same thing as mortgage. They all kind of, these past couple reports have stopped shooting up as much. And so I think it'll be important to kind of just keep an eye on what happens for 30-day, because it leads back to 90-day. But even if it were to start moving back up, you're still not in a place where it's a big near-term problem, because, I mean, look at where we are. I mean, at some point you would think that the housing market for foreclosures would start to normalize closer back to 2019 levels.
Oh,
right?
I would think that would make, I would think we're heading back to that. I think that's, regression to the mean says so.
And, and it's not that I support foreclosures, but, there's a natural market equilibrium that the market told us before the pandemic, this was the equilibrium, right? And so there's still a lot of things in the economy still kind of working back to that, because there were so many pandemic effects. There was so much money spent. There were, we had such low rates. We had all this weird stuff happen that some of the data still hasn't normalized back to where it was before.
So could you show me one more time, what were foreclosures in like 19? What was the numeric number? I think you had that.
For which year? 2019.
Yeah. So 70,000. Okay. So we could roughly double.
Yes. Yeah.
Roughly. Okay. That makes sense to me.
And then, you think of it another way, though. I mean, this is hundreds of thousands of foreclosures that just never occurred, right? And here,
yeah, of course.
Which is also kind of interesting. Anything else you want to jump into?
No, I guess the last thing I'll point out, just doing some easy math, because we have existing home sales, again, 2024, the end of the year. I think they're going to publish at 4.06 million. So let's just assume we go back to historic averages at 80,000. That's, what is that? Is that 2% of the market, roughly? Right? 2% of sales?
I want to be a little careful taking the one data compared to the other. But yeah, I think that's kind of about.
That's the rough math. But yeah. It was interesting. Because again, I think foreclosure, and the other thing that might happen in this cycle, back to your earlier point, is it would not be shocking for me to have foreclosures spike above the 80,000, for example, go to 100 and 120 for a little while and then roll over. Because I think a lot of those foreclosures that didn't happen in this one period probably should have happened. It could have been deaths, no heirs. There's lots of reasons.
Well, that's what I was hinting at, is that, the ones that have kind of disappeared, do they eventually kind of roll into the data? Do we see an artificial kind of jump there and then a back down to normalize?
I think that makes sense.
Even before we get there, we'll probably see more. We'd have to see, I think, more of jump here, and then it would lead to more jump in this one, and then it finally rolled back.
And then how often do you post this? Is this once a month or once a quarter for you?
No, I did this one yearly.
Yearly.
I think if I'm doing it more frequently, that means something's going on. So right now, that's how it is with a lot of this data, where I track a lot more than I actually publish. And so if I start to publish something, it's kind of like, okay,
something's moving.
There's something reason to watch. Yeah. So right now it's moving so slow. It would be boring to publish it all the time.
Oh, that's why you are housing. You've got all the data and been doing it for decades. Where do they go to find this?
Yeah, so they can Google ResiClubAnalytics.com and sign up for my free newsletter. I put out a lot of content, always trying to help people better understand the housing market. They can also follow me on Twitter @NewsLambert. I just want to share one more chart. I think this is kind of a fun one. There are three things that usually happen every year for the seasonal effect for housing, which is an increase in the number of new listings, right? Because, sellers kind of know that buyers start to come out into the spring and that people want to do the move while their kids are not in school. And so people do a lot of the moves late spring, summer. And so new listings every year, like clockwork, rise, bottoming in December and then rising from January through May. And then existing home sales, they bottom out around January. And then right about now, They begin their seasonal rise, which goes from February. Every month rises until about June-ish is usually when you top out, is the average. And then the other thing is, this is starting to be the time of year where you get the most upward pressure on prices. And so right around February, March, we begin the upward ascent. And there's the most pressure on national home prices from March to July. And even if you go back and you look at the crash years, even the crash years saw their most, and let me see how I would word this.
The softest declines.
They were steadier, right, in this window, right? There's that seasonal effect. And then most of their give up happened in the soft window of the year.
Yep.
Right? And so in appreciating housing markets, home buyers typically face higher home prices if they wait until later into the spring to buy. And in correcting housing markets, think like the past couple of years, like Austin, buyers and investors are often rewarded for waiting into the seasonal slower period, right? Those homes get the high days on the market, they kind of have to sell. And that's when, because they kind of work down. I just wanted to share that.
It's
this
beautiful.
chart, this one's a new one, and I've been like staring at it for a while. There's a lot in here. So like one thing that's interesting to me is that now when January 2005 prints, it will be like 32 straight months where the monthly number of existing home sales is below the average for the past 25 years. So like down here is the average, and you can see that ever since like June 2022, we have been below the average for existing home sales. And that's really, at this point cost us 1.3 million sales. You're 1.3, 2023, 1.3.
I wish there was somebody out there that called a crash in transactions. That guy'd be a genius.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Anytime. Housing.
Lance, you're amazing. Folks, go right now to ResiClubAnalytics.com. Sign up for the free newsletter. Lance, you're amazing. Talk next week.
Thank you.